Thank you, Ashu, for taking time to address the startup ecosystem. And I think we are in an unprecedented time, right? I think we have seen a lot of financial crisis in the past, 2, 3 decades of my working life. But this is actually a healthcare scare where the vectors of, propagation is actually something that people are still learning as it is progressing. And I think what is the effect of this eventually with all these lockdowns is that there is going to be a significant economic impact as well, right? To individuals, to businesses as well. And, and we are, startups ecosystem is something where people were possibly growing at 100% and 200%, albeit on a smaller base. But they are used to, driving at 200 miles speed, and suddenly we are asking them saying that look, now things are at this thing, and you have to actually look around for risk. I think none of them, and in fact in our portfolio also many of them were doing extremely well, but they never were fully prepared for anything of this nature. I think even boardroom conversations were never in this level of risk. Even in some of the mature companies which possibly 2, 3 years from now will be listed companies, I don't think risk of this level was even thought about or considered or planned for. And suddenly from that situation, now every business organization has to start thinking about risks which are not in your control, okay, which is what we call it systemic risk, right? Thank you for taking time, and would like to first hear perspective from you in terms of how to go about it, because not all of it can be planned, but like to get your insights on how to be ready for some of these.
Thank you, TCM, and thank you, Anubhav. I'm delighted to get a chance to speak with all of you. I hope each one of you are safe, healthy, as are your teams and your family members. Like TCM put it, this is really a health scare situation. And as I kick off, I'm kind of reminded of the Charles Darwinian theory. But this one is is going to put a new twist on, what he said around adaptability and flexibility. I think, in that theory, he says it's not about only survival, it's adaptability that really gets species to survive. I think for us this time, it is survival and adaptability and flexibility. And I think what will enable both is going to be how we are able to assess the situation and move ahead in a very calibrated way. And in some ways, that's exactly what risk management is supposed to be. And it is a very overwhelming situation. Even as I manage my business, there are days you do feel overwhelmed. And I think what has kept me going is one simple thing, that nothing is permanent except change, or change is the only constant. And we have to look at these times as one of unprecedented change, and really work towards coming out of it stronger. I have a few slides, and then happy to get into a discussion with TCM and all of you. This is a picture which, if any of you have been to World Trade Center anytime, will recognize it. But it's a telling one because it tells you what social distancing does to what otherwise would have been a totally packed hall. So let me begin my presentation. Saurabh, can we go to the slides, please? Everybody talks about black swan events. On the slide, I've put down events that we've seen just over the last 20 years. But if you did a chart even for 50, 60 years, you'll find plenty of these coming up. And in my career, I probably won't say, fortunately or unfortunately, just having worked for over 3 decades, I have seen all of these situations, and I'm living the COVID-19 event. I also recall the 1991 emergency situation in India, but never saw the Great Depression, which a lot of people outside India refer to. I think when I just look at all of these events on one chart, it all seems to be predictably unpredictable, because there seems to be a pattern, right? Every 3-4 years, something has happened. 1997 Asian financial crisis, 2000 .com, and then you have some sequencing, right? 2000, 2001. Then you have 2008, the global financial crisis, which a lot of us would remember. And then there are some which are still evolving. And the still evolving one is Brexit, because nobody ever imagined that something like that could happen. And the ramifications will still play out. I think what seems to be just one very common theme across each one of these is that they are all very severe and widespread events. And it's only in hindsight that I can say they were actually, they seem to be predictable. So as I think through COVID-19 in the context of Black Swan events, there is a quote which I'm reminded of, and that comes up on the next slide, Saurabh. I do not know if any of you have had a chance to read this book, Against the Gods, The Remarkable Story of Risk, written by Peter Bernstein. Interestingly, this book was written in 1996. And he says that the prevalence of surprise in the world of business is evidence that uncertainty is more likely to prevail than mathematical probability. I think that's just stating fact. But when put in that way, it does put these events into perspective. The reality in any Black Swan event is it's systemic risk that plays out. And the way I look at systemic risk, it's a risk that is thrown up by the system or the ecosystem. And it is actually the ecosystem that amplifies it. And at the same time, none of us could have predicted any of these events. But in a lot of ways, just having some cadence of risk management would just allow one to be slightly better prepared and planned. And in that sense, I think this event in particular brings out more than the other events, why a kind of proactive, integrated risk intelligence culture is necessary. And I don't use the word risk management or risk team or chief risk officer, but culture. And that's simply because it is about we who as leaders, we who as team players in companies or people working in companies can actually make this happen through being proactive, through learning from what one has seen happening in our own organizations or through the experience of others. Let's go to the next slide, Saurabh. At the same time, when I think of this particular event, the COVID pandemic, it tells a very, very different story because it is more widespread, because it impacts more countries than one can think of. It is something that touches all businesses. And I think the most worrying part is it is almost an indeterminate time frame. And like TCM said, the first thing is it is a healthcare scare. It is a human problem. It is a human tragedy. Even in the World War, there were not so many countries that were impacted. You didn't see so many people impacted, or for that matter, as many deaths. And everything else is actually a knock-on effect. You know, we're talking about our businesses. You know, we at CRISIL, we've given so many forecasts on, you know, what's going to happen to GDP growth, what is going to be the growth across different sectors. But I see all of them as a knock-on effect. But this systemic risk event has some very common characteristics with all the other black swan events, in that there is a deep impact on business. We're already beginning to see instability in financial markets, and in India in particular, given the way the bond markets have been over the last couple of days, I think it's early signs, but you're going to see more coming out. You end up seeing a liquidity crunch. Sometimes it's not because liquidity is not available, but it's risk aversion, right? You begin to see defaults, lots of bankruptcies, credit quality issues, and wide scale increase in unemployment. And the ramifications of all of this ends up being panic selling by investors. Loss of all kinds of confidence, you know, business confidence, investor sentiment gets impacted, consumer confidence gets deeply impacted. And that's because worries start overtaking life. You know, that whole thing about greed and fear plays out in the markets. You know, once a black swan event happens, it's really fear that plays out. And we begin to see, like I said, bankruptcies, economies go into recession, and household incomes get impacted. Across all systemic risk events, we begin to see policymakers, governments, authorities really kick into action. You see wide scale bailouts, relief packages, lots of regulatory changes. In all of them, we've seen accommodative monetary and fiscal policies, and lot of liquidity pumping that happens. I mean, if I think about TARP and the way it helped a lot of economies come out of the global financial crisis is a very good example. Now let's look at you know, some of the success stories through these black swan events. There are many of them, but I've picked two because in the recent times, I think the global financial crisis is something that all of us remember. And because we are dealing with a health situation and a health crisis, I thought I'll pick one from SARS, though SARS was not, is not classified as a black swan event. So JP Morgan is a financial institution that stands out for having emerged unscathed from the 2008 crisis. And that's because it had a very solid risk management system in place, which allowed it to pick up early signs on the crisis that was slowly bubbling up in the housing sector, in the real estate sector. They had started seeing the asset bubble, and therefore they had started cutting back in their exposure. And they were in a very strong financial position. And that actually helped them to become even a larger and stronger institution as they ended up acquiring Bear Stearns and Washington Mutual at very, very attractive prices at that time. And, you know, that's really made this institution stand out, not just through the crisis, but even now. And the other example that strikes me is Alibaba. You may know this, but you know, one of their employees had contracted SARS, and they had to actually quarantine their entire staff. And therefore, Jack Ma encouraged all his people to work from home. And it was something that they were not prepared for. But that just one move got them to start thinking about their business very differently. A very important thing was this is what that helped their business survive at a time when if one thinks of Alibaba at that time, it was you know, not the kind of success story we talk about now. And they actually at that time went ahead and launched Taobao, which is a website for reselling, because it just gave them an idea that something like this might really help. And then, of course, a lot followed through, including eBay quitting the Chinese market altogether. So there are two things that stand out for me. One is risk management, and second is a little bit of out of box thinking or agility when faced with this situation. Let's move to the next slide. COVID-19 is something that I believe is going to create a new normal, and the situation is evolving. I mean, whatever I'm sharing today might just end up, not being as valuable tomorrow. But some of the points that I've put down, to my mind, is what's going to shape some of our thinking. What stands out, like I've been saying, is the fact that it impacts us, you and me. It impacts society. It is going to change consumer buying, consumer behavior in a big way. We are going to see a shift, and it's very hard to determine what that shift will look like. But there are some signs, because people have started realizing the challenges of excesses in a lot of way. And it's also making people realize how important being prepared for basic living is. We've seen a big threat to worldwide business continuity. Supply chain disruption is something I know several of you will be experiencing. And it's not just now in India where we have the lockdown, but pretty much from when the issue started surfacing in China. I think there is a looming threat to a lot of businesses, business models, and operating models. No doubt the uncertainty and volatility. I don't think it's about the volatility. It's about how long this will last. And I think what stands out for me is there is plenty of money, but the risk aversion is crazy. If I think about India, the kind of surplus we have as a system, or what we call systemic liquidity, and the fact that a lot of companies are struggling to raise money is just something that stands out as a classic outcome of risk aversion. And therefore, to my mind, what's the need of the hour is really a health and safety first way of going about planning. It is about adopting digital. I know all of you are in a lot of ways far more digitally savvy than a very large part of India or a very large part of the world. Now more than ever, it's brought to the forefront, the whole aspect of making sure that there are redundancies. The fact that you have a distributed model, you have an ability to work remotely. It may be work from home or work from alternate workspaces. So to my mind, it brings out that business continuity planning, which used to, in many companies used to be somebody else's job. To my mind, it's become central to business. Business continuity is actually a leader's job. It's not some risk manager's job. The other couple of things that stand out for me as where I see the world shifting, we had already begun to see a little bit of deglobalization as a result of trade wars. I think this is going to lead to gated globalization. And definitely for the next 2 years, and until and unless we have a vaccine which is going to be easily available, it's going to be hard for people to board any form of public transport, be it trains, buses, or flights. And that is going to be a self-imposed kind of gated approach. But even countries are going to be thinking about it differently, because it is going to be where each country will want to be self-reliant and self-sufficient first. And that's going to probably rewrite a lot around the offshoring industry. It's also going to be a case where sustainability becomes central and core. So the whole ESG theme will come to the forefront now more than ever. And that's going to also determine the way capital is going to flow to businesses. Let's go to the next slide. I'm going to just spend the next few minutes, maybe just literally 2-3 minutes, talking about the way we at CRISIL responded to COVID. The theme for us is about agility in business unusual. We have an office in China, and in that sense, it allowed us to be slightly better prepared because we had to move to 100% work from home in China early February. And, that's something we did very quickly because we had the ability to pick up a lot of work that was done by our China office from some of our other delivery centers. And we were very quickly able to equip our people with, the right technology, not just about desktops and laptops, but it's about making sure that virtual interaction modes, and I know Zoom is in the news now, but we looked at more than one means. And that actually allowed us to move very quickly for all the other locations. In a lot of ways, India went last because after China, it was Europe, then the US, and India and Argentina and Middle East actually went simultaneously. What worked for us, that we were very clear that we have to make it mandatory work from home. We're fortunate to be in a business that does not require physical delivery, and therefore we were able to quickly gear up our people to meet all client deliveries. So we were able to have 99% of our people, actually almost 99.8. The 0.2 is literally some of our upkeep staff because we wanted to make sure our premises were okay with the necessary permission from authorities. And one of the very important things that we did was began to play out scenarios. Not only were we doing this for all our stakeholders, be it governments, regulators, clients, our board, but also working with regulators and authorities in terms of what kinds of measures that might need to be taken at this time. And in parallel, relooking at our business on how should we be if the lockdown in our different markets of presence extended right through this quarter, went into next quarter, if economic recovery was maybe back end of 2020 or went into 21, or what if it even went to 2022, and looked at different measures that we might want to take, and also started looking at perhaps some new analytics that might equip our clients to deal with their challenges better or to find some solutions. And also really begin to plan getting out of the situation and a return back to office plan. In my view, actually moving to work from home is much easier than getting back to office. And next slide, Saurabh. Very, very quickly, some of the very interesting things we did was looked at a lot of 24/7 support for our people, both on the medical side as well as mental health side, because a lot of our employees, live alone or live in paying guests, and for them, this isolation was really getting to them. So mental wellness kind of really took the forefront, apart from giving them a lot of access to medical help and practitioners. Very happy to share that all our people were safe through this period. And the other very important thing was seeing how we could become relevant to our community. So we reopened our kitchen, actually, our corporate office kitchen, to make food to serve the migrant workers and the underserved communities. Because communities are very, very important stakeholder. It's a very important part of the ecosystem, and very happy that we were able to do so. Let's go to the next slide. So I just want to close this formal session of my few slides by bringing basic to the forefront, because that's something that has been playing on my mind and the minds of my leadership in terms of what does it take. To me, business continuity is actually the new normal. So from here and out, operating models and business models need to account for the new norm of not having just one workplace, just one country where you import from. So it's about making distributed model the model. It's also about using this time to transform yourself digitally in a very big way, to also begin to look at opportunities, because consumer preferences are changing and ESG is going to be a very big theme. Scenario planning, because that helps make an informed decision, because you can cut costs to the bare bone, but you have to also think about what does it take to survive and come back and be resilient. So survival and resilience both need to be really thought through, and not just survival. I think integrated risk management is very, very critical during this time, because like in all systemic risk situations or black swan events, everything plays out. Market risk, credit risk, operational risk, even all kinds of people related issues. At this point, cyber risk has taken a very different proportion altogether. And also it's important to ensure very robust cash flow management, because that's going to ensure sustainability through this period. So to my mind, it is about basic. And on that note, I'd like to hand back to TCM.
Thank you, Ashu. But you interestingly mentioned saying that, risk is not an activity now anymore for some one risk manager. It is actually a leadership role and, chief executive's role. But for a startup founder who has been looking at opportunities all the time, how should one prepare himself or herself for in this new thing? Because just to give you an example, at least having seen multiple financial crises, from 2017, I have been expecting something to happen, because that is an 8-9 year cycle, right? But we thought possibly 2019 trade war would be the one, right? But that got diffused in some form. And now this suddenly erupted, and none of us could have predicted that. So how should one be aware of these things, to be on the lookout, how to plan for it?
So
you talked about that, integrated risk intelligence as a culture, right?
Yeah. So I want to start by saying hindsight is always 2020. And I'm sure that is the aha moment for everybody, because in hindsight, all of us will think, why didn't we have work from home or a remote working model anyway? Because it is a robust model. Now, the key point is, how does one ensure that that kind of thinking or that kind of thought process becomes part of the day-to-day? And that's the reason, I spoke about the integrated risk management or the integrated risk culture. Because to my mind, the difference between risk management and culture is something that it's embraced right at the top with the boards and all the people. And a risk culture gets you to plan for an unforeseen situation. And when you think about an unforeseen situation, you begin to ask yourself, okay, if something happens, and that something could be anything, because a health situation hasn't been modeled, although a lot of people in the Asian, especially in China and Hong Kong, talk about how, they dealt with their businesses through SARS. it just helps you begin to think about the fact that it is important to have alternate sources of supply. You can't have uh, all your eggs in one basket, or you can't have over dependence on any one source. It's very important in today's day and age to be able to leverage technology extremely well. It's very important to keep in mind that market risk, liquidity risk, credit risk are inherent in businesses, and in any and unforeseen situation, they come to the forefront. So I understand that a lot of our participants today are startups, and risk management per se in a fast growing business is not top of mind. But ensuring that it's at least back of the mind is very important. And the reason I say that is because that allows you, even in the context of liquidity, to always leave something for that rainy day. And that rainy day, the way it plays out in a business as usual, is it allows you that little investment or that flexibility to invest in an idea that somebody in your team has come up with. And in a rainy day, helps you to put behind, let's say, enabling your people or diversifying your supply, de-risking your supply chain, or looking at alternative ways of delivering to your clients. So, that's the reason I call it a culture. And the second important part is for leaders, for founders, for investors to talk about this in addition to reviewing businesses, and for leaders to talk about it with their teams as part of a review process and make it integral to the culture.
Yeah, this has been a wake-up call in most boards, I should say, right? And no, so to come back, the economic impact of this is predicted in various ranges, right? So globally, people are expecting anyway a contraction. Even for India, depending on whom you ask and depending on the scenario that it could be, whether it is, a single scenario or it is going to be a, multiple times of lockdowns, the W and downward trending W type of models. I think one of the key challenges is in terms of you cannot predict whether it is going to be marginal growth, flattish, or marginal contraction. But at least a lot of people are predicting that, and instead of getting into what your view is, but I think that is I think there are hundreds of views that are floating around. I think one of my questions is, it is unprecedented for India. In the last 40 years, it has not happened. I think 1780 was the last time, there was a reduction in GDP. Yeah. And it is going to have a cascading effect in terms of jobs being lost, in terms of, maybe a lot of salary cuts that is taking place, and many other industries may undergo even more very specific impact. And I think, one of the things that how should one plan for scenario in this, right? And including starting with lockdown, right? How are we going to exit from the lockdown? And then how we should plan. And each business, whether they are offline or online, has different impact associated with it.
Yeah. So the reality is it's an evolving situation, right? In our own organization, in the last 4 weeks, we have revised global GDP estimates and India estimates 3 times. And we expect to do that again, perhaps in the next 2 weeks. It is clear it is a recession. And, the fact that global GDP is going to degrow also tells you that there is going to be wide-scale impact on businesses. There are going to be bankruptcies, unemployment rates are going to go up, household income is going to be impacted, savings is going to be impacted, and all of that, because that's the reason there is degrowth. As a business in an evolving situation, it becomes very challenging because you quite don't know what would be the measures you should take and how much to do when. To my mind, the reason why scenario planning helps and making it relevant to this COVID situation. If your operations are only in India, I'm pretty sure initially people were planning for 2 weeks, then it became 4 weeks, now 40 days, and so on and so forth. So it's important to plan on, okay, what does the lockdown do to your business? But what is it doing to the broader ecosystem that you serve? And when will that economic recovery start? So let's look at a situation of, let's say, 6 months and 12 months, right? A 6 months recovery situation typically means that this entire quarter will by and large be in a lockdown or quasi-lockdown situation, because some businesses have started, there is some flexibility given. But because a large part would perhaps still be in that lockdown kind of mode or remote working mode, your recovery is perhaps unlikely to happen before the end of this year, or at best sometime next year, first half. But the second scenario is that if this spills over, then you're into the second half of 21. So the impact of having a scenario for how long will the lockdown be, what will be the impact on economic recovery, how will your own ecosystem, because for each business, it's an ecosystem it serves with, the impact is different. For example, those in the essentials business will find it much easier because for them, delivery was still possible. In fact, there is more demand, especially those who are more digitally equipped. Right? If you were already a very liquid, if you had a war chest of money and you were an NBFC, then this was an opportunity for you to step up lending. So the circumstances are company-led and your ecosystem-led. And to, in that sense, forecast what happens to your revenue, but more importantly, think about what are some of the calibrated cost measures you can take. I think it's very important to lead from the top and start with the cost cut measures at the CEO and the CEO -1 level before going to the rest of the company. Perhaps start looking at those who have a variable model on how do you tweak that variable cost structure from a staff cost perspective. But very importantly, begin to think about your own operating model. I'm sure businesses are already thinking of, or may have actually, some of them would have diversified away from China. I mean, I know in the pharma industry, for a lot of the drugs, I mean, take penicillin, where the overdependence on China was so much that, it was almost a case where how would you deal if the situation would have lasted beyond? The good thing is, production has started and China has started coming back in some way, but that what if on your supply chain also becomes very critical. And finally, and most importantly, engage with your investors and boards with these scenarios, because transparency matters. My own view is, at this point, it is about not turning off the tap, because if there is strong belief that the business is relevant, it's a good test of the relevance of the business, then ensuring that incremental liquidity to tide over this time is very important. And having that very, very free-flowing discussion is critical. And I cannot underscore, I mean, it's so important to use every single relief measure that is given, whether it is moratorium, whether it is getting the benefit of the PF being deposited by the government, all kinds of relief measures that are being given in India, in the different markets must be taken on board, and active lobbying to be done through various forums for sector specific measures. I was in a session with the regulators before, where we've asked them to look at things very differently. Now more than ever, we believe, let's say, priority sector lending should be extended to healthcare, because that is the priority. The term priority has to also evolve with times. So I'm going to stop here, because this is an evolving situation, and that's what I think I want to emphasize on. We shouldn't get locked into one plan. I think you need to revise it every couple of weeks. We've moved to a weekly review because of the evolving situation now.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, same here in many of our companies. I think, most of them have handled the BCP somewhat better, because being technology companies, they were already in some form prepared. They were living with a lot of this work from home as a culture overall. And those who could, and we are aware of companies with 10,000 plus people moving call center, working from home, right? And from PG accommodations and things like that, which is very credible. But how does one look at, or at least what are the key indicators saying that, okay, there is an inflection point, that things are getting better? And, I think I have to start planning for now the improvements which are coming in and be able to grab market maybe.
Yeah. So before I get into, how do we plan for and what are the signs, I think we should assume that social distancing is not going to get lifted with the lockdown, because this is a crisis that impacts all of us, and each one of us's safety is in question. Each one of us will just feel unsafe being in crowded places. Even having too many people in one room, at the slightest cough from somebody, there are going to be crazy kind of reactions. So in that sense, the world has shifted. I think expecting the world to get back to the pre-COVID days would not be the right assumption. And even if somebody is planning to get back to office, to ensure that you keep the social, so it's not just about wearing masks, right? And we were talking about it. We were saying that in our cafeteria, we will have to have a shift system. Let's say we start, firstly, we are saying when we start, we will start only with 10% of our people coming. And we are saying we will start 2 weeks after everything is, because we want to see how people respond. We want to check the pulse of how safe our people are feeling. We want to then say only 10% and then tell people no more than to, X number in a meeting room of this size. You want to say that in the cafeteria, every alternate sort of table only you can eat. Therefore, people who come in will be given their tokens. Your lunchtime is 12 to 1 and so on and so forth. So it needs a planning of a very different order. And therefore, BCP will become central to your day-to-day. So this time's BCP is driven by social distancing. And that has to be at play even as you get back to work. Now, what could be early signs of recovery? So early signs of recovery is actually, number one, sentiment. So I would watch business confidence index very carefully. Number two, buying patterns. The first inflection in buying patterns is the buying pattern moving from day-to-day necessity to something beyond? Not necessary. And you're kind of coming out of it when you see the luxury segment begin to see movement.
Okay.
So, that is, and that's something with the kind of data sets, analytics that is available today publicly, this will be out there in the domain, right? Also, you will see that a little around that time, some of the moratorium and all gets, the time frame, it starts pointing to it's going to come out at that point. My own view is it would be a bad idea to lift moratorium right after deeper credit crisis.
Okay.
So let's extend it further, because that gives companies the planning time. That's the time to believe that we are getting into better days.
Okay. And also this is the time for, people to think about their value proposition to the customers also, right? In terms of, I think one of the key things in our assessment, risk assessment of our portfolio, one of the important questions that we came out was, is it a must have or good to have, right? And how should somebody expand on this in terms of even repurposing their business for their customers?
Yeah, that's right. It is about relevance, because this is going to be a test of saying how relevant were you to your clients, and analyze also whether the client's need is still the same or has it changed. So it will require tweaking of your offering, whatever it might be, tweaking of the mode of delivery. I mean, like if you're in the pharma business today, uh, and your traditional sales model used to be, your medical reps and all the medical shops. I think the online channel becomes almost critical to survival going forward. It's also about thinking, would you start looking at what are some of the new drugs you want to get into? If you are, let's say, in the B2C space, this will tell you maybe some of the products that you might want to diversify into, or you might want to stop, because they were something that were really at the margin, because you don't see consumers getting back to it. And I think the IT space, the fintech space, the health tech space, the reg tech space has immense opportunity today, because the relevance of all of this will come even more to the forefront. Earlier, people used to look at it as partnering for innovation. This whole term outside innovation had become fashionable. To my mind, it's now going to be a necessity partnership. It's going to be a partnership of necessity. And therefore, I think it's important to also focus on the I of basic, which is on that innovation. Innovation is improvement, tweaking, new offering, new partnerships, and for boards also to really think about partnering, because at this time, it will help if similar companies, if you actually partnered with competition to get some of the things that you wanted from whether it's the investors or regulators or the governments, because alone you're likely to achieve less than through collective might. And that will actually help you fortify yourself to be able to implement any new things that you would have come up with during this space, this.
Now you spoke about there is a lot of liquidity. We keep hearing, RBI injecting a lot of liquidity, but that's going back in the repo space, because that is more about whether today the lenders have the risk appetite in the absence of any clarity about how the whole thing will emerge and which businesses will get affected how much, because it's just 4 weeks. We are just 4-5 weeks into the system. Yeah. But how can we manage it? We entered COVID already with a lot of, the risk averse behavior from some of the lenders who have capital adequacy, right? And fintechs have been looking at on the periphery, right? They were not actually competing on, let us say, the 720 plus rating, and they were lending to SMEs of the world. They were lending to people who are 550 to 700, right? And they are the most vulnerable in this market, right? While they might be still having models to lend, but they may not have the liquidity to do. How do you see, let's say, the industry participate and jointly between fintechs and existing lenders to do that?
So the reality is we will get hit a little harder because we were already grappling with economic slowdown, credit crisis, liquidity challenges, not because there was no liquidity, because of risk aversion, pretty much starting from 18 because of the IL&FS crisis, and then you have the X-Bank situation and all of it playing out, and the NBFC sector has been feeling challenged. See, through this crisis, we've seen some very interesting developments. And there are two that stand out, which might be relevant for a lot of the, fintech firms as well as the P2P players. We've seen the co-lending model emerge where non-banks and banks partner. It could be where the non-bank gets the customer and takes part of the loss, the first loss cover, or takes part of the loan and hands it over, or puts hands over all. So there are many risk participation models that have emerged. But the main thing about this partnership has been that historically banks have not been very good with the connect on the lending side. They've been very good on the last mile connect on the deposit side, whereas NBFCs have had a very strong connect on the lending side. So the co-lending model works beautifully, right? The banks have the deposits. In fact, they're gaining even in this crisis as money gets out of mutual funds and goes into deposits. So maybe there's an opportunity for a co-sourcing model or a sourcing model. So we've seen sourcing models where the NBFC source for the banks in line with a predetermined risk term sheet. There's a co-sourcing model. There is a co-lending model. There's a risk participation model. There is a funding model. And of course, packaging these loans and selling, or the securitization model. While that has worked for NBFCs and banks, maybe for good P2P players, this is an opportunity to do that, because banks are still keen on building the retail book. They're still keen on supporting SMEs. That is also what the government is actually pushing. And that's why we've seen measures come out even for Mudra. So today, perhaps there is need for a little bit of a tweaking of the P2P model, because I know they are not beneficiaries of receiving the benefits of moratorium, although for NBFCs also it's not clear. It's like almost like $1 million question right now. But I'm saying that in that sense, this is the opportunity for P2Ps to also begin to partner with banks. And if you make risk management as part of the culture of these firms, and it's a good opportunity to partner with banks to help embed that, not only will you get through this crisis, you'll actually come out stronger and you'll have a strong growth model.
Yeah. So one last question, in this where all businesses are affected, their financials are affected, how would rating agencies be looking at this whole thing? There have been talk about freeze. In fact, Europe has gone to one extreme, saying that whoever was investment grade bonds pre-COVID will be treated as investment grade for next 6 quarters, which is very bold in my mind, because a lot of things are going to undergo radical changes. But as rating agency, obviously not necessarily only from a company perspective, I think how should somebody be you expected?
Yeah, so it is a challenging situation. Having said that, uh, most rating agencies, and definitely CRISIL, has seen most of the events that were up on my chart. So in our 3 decades, we kind of lived through all of these black swan events. And through these black swan events, you actually rate through the cycle, so that you're able to help investors get the confidence that the opinion is that your opinion is an informed one, and that equips them to take an informed decision. There is a difference between a downgrade and a default, because a downgrade reflects the inherent condition for that time and a little beyond, and you have the opportunity to revise that position, and you can grade it, you can give outlooks from a positive, negative, stable perspective, because all of this actually brings in more transparency into the market and gets money to flow. Because if you freeze everything, then there is no transparency, and then it actually plays into the risk aversion. Whereas if you wait through the cycle, you bring in transparency and actually encourage money flow. I think one thing that I find unique that has happened this time in India, and I haven't even seen the US move towards this, is SEBI has actually asked rating agencies uh, to take the COVID scenario into account when thinking about whether the default is COVID led or not. So downgrades and default are two separate things, because see, the moratorium applies to the loans. It doesn't apply to the capital market side, because capital markets needs the issuer and the investor to really agree, right?
Correct.
And that, I think, is an important step, because it allows us to deploy our own thought process, what we've seen over the 3 decades, but also add that added nuance and flag that, this issue is because of the current situation, but otherwise the business is in a reasonable shape, because that allows people to make decisions in an informed way. And that's the way we are going about it. And we are not in the camp that believe that freezing is a good idea, because that will actually create more financial market instability than actually contribute to the cause.
No, I completely agree, because I think dynamically a lot of things are going to change. So you can't put anything on a freeze. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And most startups are also having risk on the forex side, right? If you look at it, they would need to import products and move things around. That is on one side. The other one is in terms of vendor, the whole cash flow cycle management, because large corporates have announced and gone back to their vendors saying that I need more time.
Yeah.
Right. Very big names, which are AAA, right? So how should the smaller MSMEs or SMEs or startups manage this situation?
Yeah. So I think the forex question and the vendor management one, they're very, very important questions. And if I think about forex management in India, and I just think about last 5-6 weeks, the rupee has depreciated from whatever 70.89 to 74, 75 kind of levels. My view on managing currency risk is that you're supposed to be in your business and not in the business of benefiting from the arbitrage that currency gives you. It pays to remain hedged. Nobody has actually benefited from calling the currency. So, and now more than ever, it is very important not to have those risks contribute to the systemic risk that is playing out in any case. So if somebody is not covered through forwards, etc. and all, it is very important to do that. Coming to the vendor risk, it's really unfortunate, and we've seen this happen in other times as well, that the credit squeeze becomes much more for the mid-market, the SME, for the startups, and actually the big emerge bigger, stronger. And that's something that we've been actively talking about with the governments and the regulators, to say that can you have dedicated windows to those in need, like you had relief measures on the household side. You need something on the business side. Nevertheless, I think uh, the squeeze that will be faced if you're a vendor to the large names, I would say that this is an opportunity to go to your banks and say, look, it's the large name and I need financing against it, because end of the day the moratorium is permitted, so you cannot treat these as overdue in that sense. So there is need for looking at a very different dialogue with the lending world. Be it banks, be it people on the private markets, the whole investor chain. Those things are very difficult in the Indian capital markets. It's much easier to take some of those as packaged instruments globally, because spec grade issuance is a norm there. In India, anything in today's markets, even a double A is, sometimes challenged.
Yeah.
That's why you've got to go back to the banking world and tide this out, and now more than ever keeping some liquidity buffer to keep your own machinery running is very important.
Okay. We are slightly over 1 hour. I have one last question.
Sure.
Okay. If you are okay.
I'm okay.
Okay. So I think, India is highly underpenetrated in terms of credit, right? You look at SMEs and MSMEs, substantial of them do not even have a, bank lending. So most of the initiatives being talked about, whether it is moratorium or other things, are all towards people who have borrowed. And there are a whole lot of small entrepreneurs who have not borrowed, who have not taken possibly equity from people like us, and who have been living like, hand to mouth on a month to month basis.
Yeah.
And that's going to have a severe impact on it. What should, let us say, government do, or banking system do, in terms of helping that? Because they are possibly the largest employers of marginal players, marginal income earners.
Yes. It's an excellent question, TCM. And, the emergence of the MFIs and actually emergence of P2P lending is because there is that gap in the banking system, because that credit has never gone to those in need. And now there is even a smaller chance, because the banks themselves are risk averse. They also don't know how long this will last.
Correct.
So to my mind, this is where we want the sovereign to step in. Or this is the time for the sovereign to step in. On one hand, you have increased subsidy and you've given all kinds of relief on that side. So for for ensuring that some credit flows to these people, it has to be a mandate, because the default, even in their case, will not be 100%. It will be a much smaller number. So in a way, looking at it from a big picture frame perspective, there is direct money that is gone. This money, even the same amount plowed in this form, will serve maybe 3-4 times its value, because you will get some back, because it will be in the form of credit enhancement. And that's where the need for institutions like the Mudra or SIDBI or NABARD becomes important. And, often if you are part of these institutions, having been a banker before, I can say, sometimes these things don't come to you. I really urge, see, this is the time to collaborate as an ecosystem, for everybody to go to these institutions to say that this might be something that will help, right? Can NABARD do that guarantee for the farming community? Can SIDBI do that for the MSME? Can NHB step in to do it for the mortgage side, especially on the affordable housing side, or for the, those people who are just on the verge of getting their home, so that they can exit from this rented premises and go, because that will really help. I won't say soft land, because there doesn't seem to be a soft landing situation, but soften the cushion of the hard landing is the way I'd like to put it.
No, no. Thank you, Ashu. Thank you for taking time. It was very enriching for me, at least, in terms of thinking this, because we as early stage investors are always very optimistic, and and entrepreneurs wear pink glasses, right? And try to pick up opportunities. I hope the audience also learned and gained out of listening to Ashu in terms of how risk is now integral part of the business, and BCP is also a leadership responsibility to do. And thank you, Ashu, once again for taking time.
Thank you very much. I hope it's been useful for all. Stay well, stay safe and happy.
Thank you, Ashu, thank you, Saurabh, thank you, TCM.